Hi everyone, can you hear me okay? Definitely excited for tonight. And this is the intersection of product and project management. It should be a really interesting discussion. And so thank you for coming, by the way. Wanted to just talk a couple of points about our chapter. For those of you that really aren't involved in PMI, I know that we got some people here that are on the product side of things. The Project Management Institute is 450,000 people worldwide. And we have 280 chapters. And the Mile High PMI team, we are the 10th in the world. So I don't know if you guys were aware of the fact that we are the 10th largest chapter in the United States and in the world, particularly. And wanted to let you know that we're really excited that you're here because we have a lot of opportunities as a chapter. You know, we offer networking, we offer career growth, and we offer you a lot of opportunities to learn and grow. So we're always looking, by the way, for what's the next thing. So if you guys have any ideas, we're open to saying, here's what's coming, here's what we're going to learn about, here's what we're interested in. And so we want to welcome you to PM Week as well. It's our third annual PM Week. And we have an anchor event in April, and we also have an anchor event in the fall. And this is our new anchor event. And so we're trying to make this grow, so we really appreciate you attending. And then we have a lot of other events coming up too. So tomorrow we have a career fair, a job skills search camp. Tomorrow morning we have a workshop on Saturday at, I believe it's at Regis. Don't quote me on that. It's typically at Regis. And so we provide a lot of opportunities for you all as chapter members to grow. And so I really want to welcome you tonight and thank you for participating. Really looking forward to this lively discussion. So I'm looking for good questions. So everybody start thinking about your questions, okay? And with that, I want to turn it over to Nick, who's going to introduce our panel tonight.
Thank you, Laura. Well, again, welcome. As Laura said, I think we're going to have a great discussion tonight. We've got some great experts here with us, lots of knowledge, and again, I'm really looking forward to this. So I'll be the moderator. That means I get to ask all the questions and things like that, of course. And I'd like to introduce, obviously, each of the folks on the panel. So first, we've got Jesse Garland up in the middle here. Well, I could turn this into a real kind of fun. And Jesse Garland. All right, so Jesse is a product manager and product owner at Cafe Well platform, or for the Cafe Well platform at WellTalk. She has experience in both waterfall and agile methodology. And again, like I was starting to say, she I think will bring a lot of great things to the conversation. Next up, I'd like to introduce Pam. So Pam Johnson is a principal systems engineer at Digital Globe, where she is leveraging her experience as the technical lead for large satellite ground system programs to plan for the next generation of DG satellite and information capabilities. So again, I'd like to welcome Pam. And again, a lot of great experience there on the project development side. All right, next up, I'd like to introduce Rick Landon. So Rick is he's an IT director at Cigna and has an extensive product development background spanning several industries, including manufacturing, telecom, and healthcare. So again, we'd like to welcome him to the panel. And just like some of the others, we've got years and years of experience here. And again, I think that the fact that he's got the experience across multiple disciplines, so manufacturing, telecom, healthcare, things like that, really will help add a lot to our overall conversation. And then I'd like to introduce Donald, so on the end. So Donald Meyer is a lead product owner at Arrow Electronics, where he utilizes agile methodologies to lead transformation of the shopping cart, checkout, and ERP systems. So again, I'd like to welcome Donald. And as I've kind of been mentioning, so I think Donald's got a lot of experience in the agile methodologies. So again, as we're continuing to have these conversations, we'll get a lot of firsthand knowledge from that perspective. And then last but definitely not least, would like to introduce Dan Podsidley. And Dan is VP here at Pivotal and the manager of Pivotal Tracker, which is the popular project collaboration tool for modern agile teams. Dan has experience in every aspect of software development, including engineering, product management, and UX design. So welcome, Dan. And again, a little bit different kind of perspective there as far as how everything kind of ties in through maybe the software packages. but again, excellent to add to the overall conversation that we've got. I think I will try sitting down here so I can kind of read through the questions as we go. All right, so let's see. First question. So how does the project manager and product manager role differ in concept and within your organization? So who would like to start?
My answer's short. I would say in concept, the difference is that the product manager really is the one driving the vision, and the project manager is the one who's thinking about how to turn that vision into reality.
And so I'm from Cigna, and we're a much larger shop. And so for us, in some of the smaller organizations, we saw where a person can do both of those roles. But in Cigna, because of our differentiation, we really have most of our product manager roles in the business facing and project manager in IT. But as we're moving to Agile, we're seeing them blend more and more, right? Because the role is starting to become a little bit blended about how they engage with the business constantly. So it's starting to change a little bit.
And we at Pivotal are kind of at maybe the tail end of that journey, that transformation, and we've always been big believers that the PM and the project manager should be actually the same person. And we consider project management to be a subset of what the PM is expected to sort of engage with and do on a regular basis. But we think it's important to create situations and contexts where it's possible to be successful, right, as a PM that's also doing project management. So that implies things like small teams, cross-functional teams, self-organizing, collective ownership. All those things have to be in place in order for the PM to be successful and be able to do all the things that they're expected to do.
Yep. So at Arrow, it really is kind of similar. The PO really kind of owns the vision of what needs to be executed. The PM kind of owns the how. It's especially true when there are a lot of cross-team dependencies, or when a team cannot execute that vision within itself without some additional help. Right. When the domain is large and sprawling, we need a lot of help from the PM. So.
I've been pausing because I feel like mine's a little bit of a loaded question because I see Liz laughing. So in our situation, we have the role of product manager, senior product, product owner, and you have project manager. So, and then depending on what department it is, because I actually originally started as a service delivery manager, which really was more of a project manager doing client implementations. And then transitioning over into product, I still had all those skills. I still drive people and I still move things through, but I have to step back on the how. I need to do the what, the why, the who, but I don't care as much about the how. I do care, but somebody else has to worry about that. But we don't have project managers managing that. We have work stream leads. We have scrum masters who are trying to handle the day-to-day. But then you circle in where you have all of these product teams, and sometimes you have clients who don't quite understand Agile, and so they're looking for the more waterfall approach and need to have that more traditional communication and understanding, well, what's this big how's it all coming together? So we have individuals who are handling the project management side of that. So I think it's definitely not a very straightforward answer, and I think every company handles it differently.
I'll just add that I think my experience at Digital Globe is probably similar to yours at Arrow, in that we have quite a few things that need to be delivered that cross not just Scrum teams, but they cross release trains. Mm-hmm. And it's really those integration handoffs where a project engineer or a project manager can really help facilitate and grease the wheels.
And really prioritizing those efforts so they roll out together, right? That's where the big headache is that one particular team might think this is a really big deal, but they're dependent on this one little piece from another, and they're not going to get the time of day from this group without some kind of oversight and that kind of authority from the PM.
I don't know how much time we have to talk about this first question, but I feel like
You're
we
good.
can keep going.
Yeah, sure. If you have something else to add, go ahead.
So, I mean, one thing that we've been really thinking hard about is how to organize teams to the extent that there are initiatives that may span multiple teams, actually avoiding having to span multiple teams with initiatives and allowing each team to go all the way and be able to touch any part of any code base. And it becomes more of a challenge of how do we make sure that each team has all of the skills and the people that need to work together to solve a problem, right? Because if you look at the sort of extreme of that, you have a PM or somebody in a product role that has to sort of like work with a lot of people to try and align and coordinate multiple Scrum teams in order to kind of hit a business problem or an opportunity, right? Which, sometimes is just the nature of the game for like really large problems. But can we think about breaking things down and not having super giant initiatives? And can we think about organizing teams so that they can execute, they're empowered to execute and have all of the roles working together so that you don't have one feature that spans 7 different teams, right? Or one customer problem or opportunity that spans 7 different teams.
Well, thank you very much. Can I ask Dan a question? Very nice.
No.
Should we allow this?
I didn't think we were allowed to do that here.
Should we allow this? Yes, absolutely. Here.
So my question is, can you say a little bit about how you help people grow in their expertise once you do break up the experts among multiple teams? Do you have a community of practice, or kind of how do you nurture this person's really good at that, and we've got 5 of those people across the company, and they're all on different teams?
It's a great question. It's something that I think every organization will struggle with, and maybe our perspective, maybe just kind of stepping back to where Pivotal began, we're big fans of not having experts. Okay, to take it to an extreme, right? There are no experts. Anyone can do anything. Okay, within reason, and that maybe in the context of like building software, it's a little bit easier to think about. So for us, we try and hire full stack developers who are comfortable, maybe they come in the door having some deeper specialization in certain areas, right? But then we do everything in our power to create situations where others will learn from those people. For us, pairing is a huge thing where all of our developers pair, right? Like 8 hours a day, there's no exception. We sort of built a system, essentially a company around it. So at least on the engineering side, there's a very sort of conducive mechanism in place that helps people learn from one another. But the challenge is, of course, like there are so many things to be experts in or be kind of familiar enough with in order to be able to execute that it's hard to imagine that everyone can do everything. And on our team, for example, like we're a SaaS application. We have multiple platforms. We have like web, we have iOS, we have Android. While it's ideal for us to imagine that any one of our developers can work on any one of these code bases and platforms, like from one day to the next, the reality is that you really have to, invest in the learning and have to be thoughtful about moving people around and try and just maintain enough of a balance. And again, then it comes down to, for a given initiative, right? Like one of our teams, or what we call pods in the larger team, if they're going off on a mission to build a new feature, I don't know, like maybe people want monkeys in the application. Okay, well, monkeys have to now be built in the API, right? Monkeys have to be supported on the web, iOS, Android. So ideally, one team can execute on that and just make sure that they have the right combination of people with the right, iOS and Android and web experiences and skill sets. And that project actually becomes an opportunity for people to pair together. And at the end of that project, now we've made more people be more familiar with some of those platforms just through the opportunity to work on that project together, right? So, but it's an ongoing thing that you have to manage.
Great. Oh,
So I assume that you're building a team around the project rather than passing the project around to various teams.
Yes, I think it's a question of what do we consider to be a project, right? And I think that can depend. Some are more kind of longer-lived, sustained things. Some may be somewhat more finite and shorter-lived, right? And those are, I think you have both, and we try to organize teams around either.
great. Good discussion. Good discussion. It kind of leads into the next question, and maybe what we'll do is we'll just have each person kind of highlight maybe the top 1 or 2 here. But the question would be, what do project and product managers need as far as qualities or characteristics to be successful. And so again, maybe just some kind of quick kind of key characteristics that you would kind of highlight, and whether they're like they're different or they're the same.
I'm just gonna not hold this mic anymore. So my answer will obviously be somewhat constrained or biased because we don't have people who are just project managers. I mean, we actually do have some at a program level, right? And we call those program managers or technical program managers, and they're doing the sort of much higher level coordination, communication between kind of larger, groups of people. But at a project level, right, there are no project managers, there are only product managers. So I can speak to like what I consider to be, the right maybe qualities or skills, and it's pretty close to me right now because I've been trying to hire a product manager for a long time, and it's really frustrating. So I want there to be more, qualified product managers out there. And people kind of come into it from different, backgrounds. Some will come from a more of a tactical or project side. Some will come at it from a business analyst background or side. Some will come from design. Some will come from engineering. And it's always this question of like, well, how do you then get to a point where you have enough of all of the sort of, I don't know if they're skills, more like, they're like discipline. So ideally, a product manager can sort of think big picture strategically, right? So there's like a business angle to it. Then there's maybe like a marketing like hat that you might need to wear sometimes when you think about how do we talk about our product, how do we promote it, how do we communicate, or how do we work with marketing. There is a little bit of a technical sort of, I don't know that you need to have technical skills per se, but you need to be comfortable in a technical conversation, right? Because all software projects do get in the weeds, and sometimes you do have to sort of figure out what to do when you have engineering arguing about, big refactoring versus, working on a feature. We're building APIs and integration, so there's kind of a comfort level that you need with technology, right? Design, right? There used to be a day when design was almost like an afterthought, or design was purely like a visual thing. But these days, right, like as a product manager, you have to facilitate the design kind of, the research, the validation, maybe coming up with some experiments, working closely with design. So having a little bit of a sort of a design kind of thought process around, or being comfortable with that. And I think there are like multiple other things, including, of course, project management, right? Like just being able to organize, break things down, run planning meetings, retrospectives, stand-ups, all of those things. So it's kind of like this interesting, like, wow, you need to have just enough of all those things, right?
Right.
And so that's my
I'm gonna
really
challenge
short
you
answer.
Here. I'm going to challenge you here.
All
right. Just kind of succinctly, what are the top two qualities that you would say you look for? So you said you're hiring right now. What are the top
I'm just going to say that it has to be the ability to have multiple, like being able to switch context, think big, but execute small.
Perfect.
And
okay.
I'll just.
That's excellent. That's great. All right. How about some of the other panelists here?
So when I kind of think of this, I think about the transition that I made, where I had, project management, you need to get this done, here's the task, here's the goal, cool, oh, I gotta bring people together, let's move things through. And then when I shifted over into product, the biggest challenge I experienced was going to like, hey, so what do we need to do here? You get to make that call. Oh, okay. So that was the biggest hurdle I had to personally overcome, was being confident enough to know that my decision's good. That, it's not right or wrong. You have to make a decision, and that's to, fail fast, get it out there, see what you can do, tweak it. So you're going to use, I think, project management skills. It's, I think, one of the reasons why I feel like I've personally been successful in my roles because of my project management. But my growth that I'm constantly trying to do is, okay, thinking bigger, strategic, get out of the weeds, don't worry about the day-to-day, and start trying to think of tomorrow instead of right now. And so that's been the biggest fun growth that I've had to go through.
Okay, so I'll take it from a large project, right? So our project is really big right now. It's $68 million this year. We have a product manager that's really coming from the product, trying to represent our clients and customers, and integrating with 20, 30 departments, right? And so what we really think our product managers is a couple things. First of all, we've went away from professional business PMs as our product managers to people that really know the business, the operations, and have have been around, because we want those people to really be able to make decisions and fail fast, right? If they get 90% of it right, we're in a great spot. If they don't have the expertise, we're really struggling as a program, because they really have to cross a number to this. And the second piece that I would say there is you definitely have to have the IQ, but we're really focusing a lot more on the EQ these days, where they have those soft skills that they can really manipulate, working with all of these different teams and find compromises across big organizations like this. And so those are some of the things that I would say the product managers have really developed into our organization. And I think most of us are fairly familiar with project managers. It's, in the traditional PMI sense, driving the 3 triangles and that kind of stuff. They have a lot of overlap. And as we move to Agile, which we're doing, we're now seeing those 2 pieces blend a lot more.
So yeah, for me, from a product perspective, the most important thing is original thinking. But what the hell does that mean, right? Such a cop-out answer. So kind of breaking that down a little bit, what that means to me is the being comfortable enough with yourself to look like an idiot, like I right now. But asking annoying questions, the why do we do it this way? I get it, you've been here for 20 years, but explain it to me again. Getting all the way down to that root, and then saying, but why? Why do we do it that way, right? So being comfortable enough with yourself to be that annoying, pestering guy in the back of the room that just won't go away.
My short answer again. You wanted just 2? Rick kind of stole one of my top 2, which is the EQ, right? I think both product managers and project managers need to be good at building relationships and be always doing that, so that when it's crunch time and you go to call on somebody, they're not like, who are you? You don't want to have that experience, and I think that's something that both the product managers and a project manager needs. The other piece that I would say in terms of just general skills would be crunch the numbers. Know where your costs are, because I see that people are often challenged to know where their true costs are. And while the project manager might have a better view on your capital investment, your product manager to some extent has even a little bit more complicated task when crunching numbers in terms of what does it cost to support this operationally.
Great. Okay. So now again, kind of along those lines, you guys are doing a great job. I'm just kind of moving right on through here. I think in some cases, so I think I heard that we don't have maybe both product and project managers in all cases, but I think for those that do, what kind of tips would the panel provide or give to those who do have both a product and a project manager, and again, how you can kind of manage things between the 2 of them to their best. And if you have any examples or anything like that, that would be excellent to share as well, I think.
I would say as far as tips would definitely be the relationship, and having a very good relationship with your project managers. Depending on what, I can use Liz and stuff as an example. We work pretty closely together, where she's trying to drive with the client, understand, okay, great, these features that we're really trying to monitor, how are they doing, how are they coming, and then when we've trying to put this plan together, because software development, nothing's ever on time, and you surprises, and trying to allow for as much buffer. But then if something's coming up, or hey, we've got to shift because we realize it's actually going to be an easier thing to go this other route, bring us a higher value, and we can do this, defer this other piece, and making sure you have that constant communication, because there's nothing worse that they have is a surprise where get the report the next day and everything's in red and not understanding why. So it's just, I try to get ahead of that and communicate early and often.
I've seen some, feedback from situations where a challenge was lack of maybe clear boundaries, at least it seemed in that conversation, because there's this overlap, right? And if you don't establish what is it that I do versus what you do, right? Then there can be some challenges, right? Like who decides this? But then it's kind of tough, because then you're talking about boundaries. It almost seems like there's a wall, and we have to sort of figure out like what's on this side of the wall versus your side of the wall. What if we talk about, breaking down boundaries and not having these explicit, like, okay, I'm a product manager, so this is what I get to do, and you're a project manager, this is what you get to do. This is like, we're two people on a project, right? We're working together. These are all the things that need to be done, right? These are the decisions that have to be made, right? How do we help each other? How do we empower? You might have a different maybe skill set that complements mine, right? Maybe I'll spend a little bit more time with the stakeholder conversations and maybe more outbound stuff, right? You'll be more focused on kind of execution with the team, but when I'm out there talking to maybe a customer, well, how are you going to deal with situations where you have to make a decision? So how about I empower you to make decisions, but we're going to stay in touch, and then we'll have a way to share. Maybe we're on Slack together, so like when something comes up, you can ask me if need be. But like, so I think at the end of the day, it's less about boundaries and more about like, how do we work together, right? And how do we just do all these things? And maybe developers can help with some of the things that normally fall under project and product management. Like, why do we have to have these like explicit labels? It's all about empowering the team and making sure all the things get done, and communicating and having retrospectives and adjusting that which is not working, and so on.
So I'd go a little bit farther with that, because I think that's right where we're at. So for our product managers and project managers, right, we're really trying to empower them so that they can do code. As we said, we're trying to move to agile. And so it's all about changing the mindset of our company that we would define requirements and deliver something 12 to 18 months later. It just doesn't work, and literally by the time we delivered, the market's already changed and we're not delivering what the market wants. So we're really trying to teach both of those roles, whether it be a product manager and a scrum master or a release train engineer, which kind of fits more into our product manager role, that take initiative, understand what the business goals are, and really go implement quickly so that we can fail fast and change if need be. So we're really trying to push that into those two roles.
Which I think the important thing becomes then, as you capture what the goals are, right? Like, it should be about understanding what problems you're trying to solve rather than somebody's understanding of what the solution should be, right? Because if it starts with like, this is a solution, then the team isn't really empowered to make decisions as they discover things to the contrary or as they learn, right? It's like, well, all we know is that this is supposed to be the solution. But if we as a team have a really good understanding of what problem we're trying to solve, like, as it turns out, I think if we all have all of the same information and all of the understanding, then we'll probably make the similar decisions as far as what needs to happen when we encounter X versus Y, right? So then as a good product manager at the beginning, it's about framing the problem and really sharing, like, why are we doing this? What is the business problem here? Now, of course, like on some level, like, it's just like too big. We can't, there's a lot of nuance and detail, but if you can kind of break it down a little bit, right, to sort of smaller context, and within a given context, maybe you can share like what's the goal here, and then anybody could almost, sort of keep it going and make the right decisions as you encounter new learnings.
I think my answer is kind of complementary to the conversation happening right now. Similar to what Dan said, I think the success between the product manager and the project manager is that conversation that starts early and continues to happen. And like you said, you're maybe working in a framework where there's an expectation that the product manager has a certain set of roles and responsibilities and the project manager has a different one, but every pair is going to complement each other a little bit differently. So it's just have the conversation about what are our handoffs going to be, let's define them, when will they happen, and then the other piece would be know who can make which decisions, right? I hear a lot of people say local decision making, but I've seen that enacted as, well, if I want to make a decision, I will, and if I don't, I won't. And without having that insight into how broadly what's the blast radius of your decision. So I think that's the second thing to really help a product manager and a project manager work together, is to understand which decisions can be made by whom, like you were saying, Dan.
I feel like we should disagree more on this panel or something. I disagree.
I like the blast radius comment on the decision. I like that.
One quick thing to add real fast.
Yeah, sure.
So like on a traditional Scrum team, there are are no roles, right? There's no QA, there's no I'm a back-end developer, I'm a front-end developer, I'm the API guy, right? They all own the stories that they pull into Sprint together. And from my perspective, I would like to see product and project work similarly from a planning perspective, right? Like we need to decide what to build, and we need to communicate when we're going to be able to deliver it and how much that's going to cost, right? And I think that those two guys can, or men and women, whatever, can do that together, right? To some degree. Now, the API guy is going to know that Java layer a lot better than your Angular guy, right? And maybe they don't like totally overlap, and maybe there is some degree of specialization, but we all own this process together to deliver the project, right? So.
Good point. Good point. All right. So now everybody gets to take a breath for just a minute up here. I'm going to ask a question to the audience. So does anybody, just show of hands, have a project running right now that's being led only by a project manager, not a product manager involved? Nope. Okay. How about the reverse, where you have a project being run the opposite way, but not the other?
Only by product? Only by product. Yeah.
Only by a product. Okay. All right. So then I'll now turn it back. So I guess what I would like to ask the panel then is, in a situation where you have a project being run and you've only got a product manager in place, you don't have a project manager, any thoughts or comments on, again, what can help kind of make that project successful without, again, that quote-unquote project manager?
So I think, to me, I would evaluate if that individual, if they have any basic project management skills, because if they don't, I think it would be worth the investment in making sure they have the basics. Because it doesn't matter if you don't need to be an expert, but to give some folks some guidelines, because I've worked with individuals who are super amazing people, but there's some little things they could do differently that would make their project so much easier and run a lot better. I was fortunate early on in my career to have that guidance, and so I think seeing the difference it can make, and they could be the littlest things, like, hey, when you're setting a meeting, make sure you have goals of this meeting and why you're attending, so people can decide, ooh, do I actually need to come to that meeting? It's like the little things that can just go a long way. So that would definitely, if you have somebody who has no project management experience, I would make that investment.
Yeah, and as companies try to, lower the overhead on projects and everything, one of the scenarios that we've kind of looked at is typically if the project is going to have a lot of technical changes, we are assigning a project manager or a scrum master. If it's really more business focused and they can really work on the systems that we have as is, we're fine sort of letting that be run by a product manager or the business organization. But that's kind of how we differentiate, are we assigning both? And I think every company's trying to lower the overhead that we put on cost, but we're trying to make the project successful as well.
Yeah. In my experience, the product owner really is successful in that scenario when they have the ability to explain iterative development to our primary stakeholders, to upper management, to C-level, right? If you can't do that, then you're not going to have the air cover that you need in order to make adjustments and move timelines, and you simply won't succeed. So having that ability to explain yourself and explain the process in a concise way to executive leadership, I think, is probably the most is the biggest success determinant in my experience.
Maybe just some like simple things, but just having like some clarity of how we work, what is our process, the tools that we choose to use for communication and project management, and not to be here and promote my own product or anything, but like obviously I have a bias here. But if you're using like complicated tools that require someone to like literally operate the tools, and then that becomes like what you sort of call project management, like, is that necessary? Like, what if we simplified our workflow, right? Do we need to have 74 steps in our workflow? Do we need to have 7 different configurations of workflow that we have to sort of put together every single time, right? Can we just keep things lightweight, right? Like simple, lightweight tools that people can use themselves, right? Like it's easy to break down your project into a bunch of stories. not have to like reinvent everything every time. Like it kind of just takes away a lot of the burden, and then you can focus on just more of the product aspects of the work, and you know, building and delivering and making your customers happy.
All right. Any other comments along those?
I mean, it's a good point. I mean, I guess it's a good point. I think that we all fall into the trap of the tools, right? And there's a reason why it's people that is the determinant factor. It's keeping it lightweight and keeping it away from the tools. And I think that there's a constant pull towards tools. And I'm going to upset some people here, but usually that comes from the PMO in my experience. And it's the product team that's trying to keep it as lightweight as possible. So anybody gonna yell at me? Probably. But in my experience, that's where that comes from. Is a new project manager comes in, they want to impose the tools that they are familiar with, that they know how to communicate with C-level executives with, and now we have this friction, and that there's that wall. This is my role. That's your role. So I think that that's a really good point. Over reliance on tools is something that we need to seriously avoid.
At the end of the day, if you can manage your project on a paper napkin, I mean, then that's awesome.
And I just wonder, and like maybe I'm lucky to not be in a huge organization where there's like a bunch of PMO and layers of communication, but like I imagine like that's how you end up with these full-time roles that do nothing but like sort of just fulfill all of the ongoing reporting and project kind of roll up requirements, and that's unfortunate. But this is how we create rigid, monolithic organizations that can't really move fast enough and can't be nimble enough and can't really empower the teams on the ground to like just do what needs to be done and learn and go, right? So I know like we as a company, Pivotal is working with a lot of large organizations that are really trying to, break that up and sort of move more toward we're more decentralized, right? We empower the teams on the ground, and that reduces all the sort of burden of, project management to a certain extent. So I think there is a recognition that like things do need to get more lightweight, and we need to operate more like a collection of startups rather than like one big monolithic centralized PMO driven organization. And apologies to those who are on PMO groups here, sorry.
I'm going to make a little guess here that Dan and Jesse work on platforms that are 15 years old or less, and that Donald and Rick and I work on platforms that are 15 years old or more. 30 years or more. And yeah, and I just want to bring that forward because that's really relevant to the art of the possible in this space.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Because as I hear Dan speak, right, we're building software platforms, right? Ideal in the world, and we were talking about this earlier, of 170 integration points every single deployment. Every 10 weeks, we're trying to manage 170 applications all at the same time and all doing that testing so that they can all go and we don't break another downstream system. So it matters the complexity and scale of your company.
So you're deploying daily?
No. Right? We in our best deploy every 10 weeks, right? That's our best. We cannot get any, and we've struggled and fought, scratched, but we can't get faster than that right now. Yeah. So it depends on your size and complexity of your organization and the legacy systems that you have, right?
Excellent conversation. All right. So I was actually, next step here, I was going to try to get the panel engaged a little bit, maybe try to get them to disagree here or there. But I think, again, that was excellent conversation right there. So what I'm going to do next is rather than just a general question, what I'm going to go ahead and do is throw out a topic. And then I'm going to ask the panelists to agree or disagree and then kind of support that, if you would. So first topic. The agile project management methodology has become the industry standard and will completely replace all other project management methods like waterfall methodology. And you get to agree or disagree.
I would, as much as I would love to agree, I will have to say to disagree, and mostly because as when you have organizations, the big monoliths who don't change very quickly, or trying to think where I was going with my thought, with my experience of now, most of our clients, health plans or these bigger organizations that are stuck in a very regimented way, and kind of like be like working with one of an organization like yours, where we can't really turn quickly, can't move as fast as we'd like to, so we have to have a waterfall because certain things have to happen. Where our shop, we want to be nimble, we want to be quick, and so we're agile, and so sometimes that friction happens. So as much as I would love to say agile will replace everything, I don't know if it will quickly.
I think it's this kind of like an interesting conversation around like, what do these things mean anyway, right? Like, what is agile? And there's all of this like, well, a lot of startups are like in this post-agile world. They've tried agile, but now they're doing something else, right? They're just like, they don't call it anything. It's like, well, we just put some stuff in Trello and then we just kind of work our way through it, and like, it's good, but we're not agile. We tried agile and it didn't work. Well, what does that mean? You tried agile? Well, we tried an agile project management tool, okay, or like maybe it was like Rally or something. It's like it didn't work for us, so we're done with agile. Now we're doing something else, right? So there's like that kind of sort of aspect to it, but there's also like, well, agile is kind of like a meta thing, right? It's like do what works and improve how you do it, so that like learn from what you're doing, embrace like people over tools, that sort of thing. So sometimes like this kind of debate about like waterfall versus agile is just like an interesting one. So then what is waterfall in this context? Is waterfall not doing what makes sense and not valuing people over tools and that sort of thing? Oh, well, actually, we're just talking about like how long the cycles are, right? And sometimes like you do have to do a lot of work to sort of define what the product is going to be up front, because by the way, you're building a Boeing 787 or something that has a lot of hardware that you have to like, there's lead time and you have to spec it out. So what does this mean? So you have to define things, but then do the cycles still have to be 18 months long? So you could do a combination of like well thought out, very specific like requirements, which are just real, like, okay, this thing has to fly and we have to do a lot of engineering around that. But then can we reduce the cycles? Maybe we do 3 months instead of 6 months or 8 months or whatever, right? So like kind of compress it a little bit. So the point is, I think you can kind of blend these together and have a conversation about the specific things, like how do we work? How long are our cycles, right? Do we write tests? Do we not? Agile isn't like, well, we'll just do whatever and like we'll just do little small things and like there's no thought around like where we're going, or like there isn't any specifications because we're working with an API. Like, I don't think it's any of those things, right? So I think it's a conversation that needs to be reframed, right? And maybe we stop using those terms because they're so overloaded.
Yeah, I think he totally just cheated, right? It's the Kobayashi Maru. I would say that until government or finance or medicine embrace iterative development, that is not going to happen.
So, and I
Are
would
we
look at that a
finally
little bit-
disagreeing? Sorry.
And I would disagree because I think that the methodology that you choose really depends on the solution that you're trying to drive, right? So some of our teams have something that they have to do, let's just say every quarter, right? And it works, it's repeatable, it works well for them to be waterfall. In fact, I think they would struggle in some of the other pieces, right? So when something's really defined and it doesn't need to happen quick, I would also say some of our production support teams are running Kanban. They don't even want to run Agile, right? They really just want stories to come in, for someone to prioritize them, and then to kick them out the door. And for the things that are really customer facing, we're trying to do Agile and push that. So in my world, and I probably should say I'm an SPC4 coach, right? So I'm a safe coach in trying to move our organization to Agile. I don't think it's really the right move to say everybody moves to Agile. I think teams should find the right way for them to work and minimize some of the overhead that we have with PMO and red tape and all that kind of stuff to deliver value.
I'm just curious, like, how do you distinguish Kanban versus Agile in this context?
So when we do agile, right, we're really talking about going back to the business, them developing, program epics, breaking our portfolio epics, breaking them down into program epics, and just kind of following through all of those different Kanban systems. And when we use the Kanban word, right, that is a team that really has a product owner that just prioritizes, and it's really just user stories that come from defects and iServe requests that we have. And so that's how we sort of use Kanban versus Agile.
Yeah, and I would see that, like, I think both are agile. They're just sort of for different purposes. There's different, like, some things are a little bit larger that to be broken down, and they're a little bit more planned out, right? Of course, if you sort of keep saying things like that, then it's almost starting to sound waterfallish. So in this case, we've almost like reframed agile to be a little bit more like waterfall in contrast to what you're calling Kanban. So it's interesting, and this is, I think, my point is that these terms are somewhat slippery, right? And so I think we should just dig into like these specifics. Like, do we have a backlog, or do we try and keep things very kind of lean in terms of work in progress, right? Do we build out these kind of larger epics because sometimes we have to, right? And for some situations, like, of course, that's just what you have to do because you have to capture all of those kind of problems to solve, etc., right? And maybe a project that starts that way then kind of transitions or segues into operating more in a Kanban style, right, where it's a little bit more just in time, right, based on kind of immediate priorities and learnings, right? But the terms, to me, just seem a little bit arbitrary these days.
Going to be another disagree. I don't see us going there, and it's a lot what you indicated, like there are just certain industries that are not likely to get there. However, I actually have some coworkers who have had government customers, and they have done agile development, and they've had it work for them. So it's, I think, all about what Dan said earlier, which is you're right-sizing the teams to the platform that they're working on and the work that they're delivering. The other piece I would say is we could take some of the thinking about Agile in terms of, is your customer satisfied, and finding that out early and often, and in cases where you are in a waterfall situation, how can you get that to happen sooner? Just avoiding surprises.
Excellent. All right. Any other comments on?
I strongly agree with that, right? It's about finding ways to get, learnings and feedback earlier on, even if you do have to sort of fulfill a specification or you have months of lead time, because of HIPAA or, other kind of compliance regulations, right? Like, you could still have like some proxy customers that, you're not actually shipping, but you're like, they're using your product, right? And it's real enough where like you're starting to get feedback, even though you know that the cycle is going to be long to ultimately kind of launch the product.
Just real quick, and I didn't mean to suggest that none of those industries have agile projects, right? Just to clarify that. I guess that there will always be a project where it's your primary stakeholder, government entity or whatever, wants to have that requirements document, and they want to sign off on it, and they want them to sign off on it, and them to sign off on it before you start development day one, right?
I'm just going to throw a curveball. So what I'm working on right now is a mission concept of operations that will be paired with a business requirements document for a program that we will implement through multiple release trains. So it kind of gets to this, what is Agile, what is waterfall, does actually saying what you're going to build ahead of time mean that you don't have flexibility? Not if you say it in the right way.
So do you plan on building a minimum viable product and iterating on it after it's live in the wild?
What we will be doing is breaking things out into what is the minimum that can support certain functionality. We will be in a world where to get that minimum piece, we will have to cross teams to get our first use case. Mm-hmm. And to get our second use case, we'll have to cross trains.
But you plan on being in the wild for that MVP?
What do you mean by?
Like live and actually being user facing, like.
Yes, the first MVP will be able to come without the second.
Yeah. Sorry, I hate holding that.
I think there's also like sometimes there's just practice, like finding an incremental path can be a little bit of an art form, right? And sometimes when you're not used to it, right, it's like you just assume that you have to build out this entire underlying foundation first, and it's going to take 3 months, and then you have to build like the layer on top of it, and only then can you start exposing functionality, right? So that's more like how you break things down, how you prioritize, right? But that can sometimes lead to long cycles, and it's like, oh, well, that's just the way we've always done it, or that's how our architects tell us to do, so now we're doing these waterfall-y long cycles. But like, well, do we have to do it that way? Like, what if we do vertical slices, right? And we think about like cohesive functionality, not all of it, but cohesive enough that you actually have a working system early, right? Even if, yes, the journey is long, you're rebuilding some existing system, but like, there are still ways to make it more agile by doing at least internal incremental releases and having vertical slices rather than these long kind of foundational pieces that have to layer on top of each other. I don't even know what the original question was here. I feel like we've just kind of
That's
followed
okay.
the
That's
journey.
okay. That's actually kind of the idea, right? I mean, any other comments?
And we're back to agreeing.
All right. Well, I will say that even though we can't get you to really disagree very much up here, you guys are very timely. So it's almost like we scheduled or planned this perfectly. But so I think we'll go ahead and move into the question and answer section here. I do have some other topics that we can throw out if we get through all of your questions. But I'd like to open it up to any questions. So, and then actually, should I do that?
Her title is Systems Engineering. And I'm curious if that is the INCOSE type of systems engineering, and if so, how that applies to the project and product management you're doing.
Loaded question. We have been evolving through our SAFe implementation since about 2013, pretty heavily in the space that I influence, a little bit earlier in some other spaces that aren't as close to actually operating the satellites and making sure that they are healthy and safe. Lowercase, S-A-F-E. But so I coined myself as principal system engineers so that I didn't have to explain that, oh, my job title is solutions technical lead, which is a little combination of INCOSE system engineering and project engineering, and in some cases, de facto product manager, because we've had product managers that we've been an engineering-based company, and we're pivoting to be a product-based company, in part because we started as such an engineering, like, we're awesome, we can do really hard engineering kind of things, and that's not necessarily something you can sell on the street. So now, as we're pivoting, we're kind of going through role shifts, and yeah, I do some INCOSE style system engineering. I do some things that, in some cases, I think CPOs would be doing, and in other cases, what product managers would be doing. And in some cases, depending on that conversation early on that I have with the project manager I'm working with, I might be doing some of the things a typical project manager would be doing. Does that answer your question?
Great
it's
question.
not pure.
Great question. Oh, great. One in the back here. I think they're trying to re-record it, so I think it helps a little bit, if you don't mind.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to the last question / debate about if we're going to move fully to agile. I know the focus is on delivering value, and it's about the interpersonal skills and having those teams collaborate and bring all that power to deliver. My question is there any reason why we wouldn't want to build hybrids? Is there any reason why it has to be black or white?
I work in a hybrid. I always jokingly call myself our team like the rebel team because, you know, for a while that everybody wanted to be very Scrum Agile practice, and working with the team, they were like getting blocked or like, this is too much process. We're slowed down. We feel bogged down. And I'm like, well, what do you guys want to do? Like, well, can we do this and not do this? I'm like, sure. Suddenly we're kind of doing a Scrumban process because we had to play in a 2-week iteration. But at the time, we just kind of had our Kanban board, and then we have our little backlog in the board, not in the unschedules, because that way, because we still had to kind of play within the I had to play within the waterfall world to help meet, you know, planning needs. So I'm kind of like, well, here's some stories, and we kind of got them pointed. Let's put them in some iterations, and then, but every 2 weeks, the team would confirm, like, yes, we can take that in. No, we can't, because we got to carry these over. And it's like, and it's fine. And so we would do the pulling from. So that way, you know, we kept things in the order of the swim lanes, and then the teams can pull it over, but we're still within the 2-week box. So it's Kanban's usually, I think, or traditional Kanban's more of like, it's a week, get things done quickly. You don't bring anything else over. You have your WIP limits. We didn't have WIP limits. So we're pretty flexible and fluid as long as the team got what they needed, they can get work done, and they felt the freedom and take ownership. If they said, hey, we can't do this story like we thought in the iteration because we got to do this other foundational thing we just identified. Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Let's reprioritize and bring it in as we need to.
I feel like a lot of times the conversation about agile versus waterfall versus hybrid is somewhat of a political one, right? It's not actually talking about like how we're going to work or like what's the best way to approach this project, and asking like, hey, how can we be as incremental as is possible given the constraints? How can we reduce complexity of communication, right, given the constraints? Can we work directly with some customers? Is that possible? So like, rather than asking these specific questions and then choosing an approach that is as, you know, nimble, that enables as much direct communication as possible, that allows us to learn earlier rather than later, it's this agile versus, I mean, we have like some customers that we're involved in with where they've sort of organized different kind of groups of people into like extreme programming and Scrum, okay? But it has actually nothing to do with any of those things. It's like, no, one is actually more directly under the PMO group. The other one is more like they're embracing certain engineering practices, but these are not even like mutually exclusive, right? And it just becomes this like debate around who's the boss and, you know, which kind of political wing we're going to go under. So I'm not saying like that's, you know, where you're coming from, but I've just found that to be the case sometimes when these questions come up, which is really interesting.
I would just say or suggest that if you're going to a hybrid approach, that everybody better be crystal clear as to what the process actually looks like. Because it's I think it's easy to explain Agile. It's awfully easy to explain Waterfall. But if there's ambiguity from the top to the bottom at all, then it's not going to work.
Any other comments on?
Well, and even more so, the more complex and the more integrated the systems are, right? So I'm someone that believes in lean and lots less process, but the more that you have to integrate with systems and the more hybrids that are going on, the less likely you're going to be successful in actually putting something coordinated into production that works, right? So there is some, you know, I feel like all of the companies have a hybrid of some version that we're using, but at least that company needs to understand it sort of holistically if they're going to be delivering, you know, incremental and integrated code.
There's a lot of political danger, like you say there. I mean, let's be honest. There are people who are adherents to one or the other, and they are going to fight for their vision, right? And if you guys settle in the middle and it fails, there's going to be a ton of finger pointing, and some heads are going to roll, and they're going to clean house maybe, and they're going to start from scratch, and you know, we just lost a whole bunch of money. So that alignment I think the lack of that alignment is why hybrid projects typically fail.
Great. All right, more questions. Perfect.
So I guess regardless of your methodology that you're using, are there shared metrics of success that you look for in your projects?
Did you deliver on time and under budget? Right? I mean, I think we can all agree on that one, right? I mean, even an agile project that says, you know, this is what we're trying to do. We have it on the roadmap. I brought it to the dev team. We have a T-shirt size on it. We haven't broke it down into stories. I have no idea what it compares to velocity. I'm just going to take a stab in the dark at it, right? This is when I think it's going to get delivered. If I don't have that trust from my superiors to say, okay, if it pushes, let me know, and that's it, right? And I think that same kind of thing holds true for a waterfall project as well, that you have to have that kind of buy-in and trust from your superiors within the system and your stakeholders, right? But that being said, at the end of the day, it should accomplish the task that it set out to do, right? Did it drive traffic? Did it decrease, checkout abandonment? What did it do? Did it do that thing? In either project, you're going to be held to that standard, right? But you have to have those defined before the project launches, right? You have to determine this is how we're going to measure success, right? And this is how quickly we think we can do it. I think in either project.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, right? Like sometimes the conversations are about the wrong metrics, right? Or like it's just obsessing with metrics for the sake of metrics, and then you start talking about, well, what's our velocity, and like our velocity should be X instead of Y, like things like that. Or even what should our WIP be, and things along those lines. But these are all just kind of like a means to the end at the end of the day. I feel like the important thing with those kinds of metrics is to like keep them consistent, right? Because any sort of fluctuations in those things like is usually a bad sign. Like something's going you're like scrambling to like hit some deadline, and then you have like everybody just like passes out and goes home, and then you get nothing done for 2 weeks, right? And you can't have any sort of predictability if you don't have consistency, right? But at the end of the day, it's like the only metrics that really matter is the ones that give you some indication of like, success of the project or like business value. And that also becomes a really fun conversation sometimes. Like, how do we measure business value, right? It's like, what is that? So I think it depends on the project and like, what are you trying to do? If you're trying to make it so that customers have a shorter, wait time at the checkout window or something, it's like, okay, well, that's what we're measuring, right? Like, what is it now? What do we want it to be? Is it there, right? Have we solved the problem? Sure, I mean that's how you would frame the problem, right? But then like within, like as you're executing, then it's like, well, what's our velocity and all those things, right? But like those are just kind of, kind of like tactical things that maybe is about consistency or something. But at the end of the day, all that matters is like, did the checkout time go down?
I'm going to push a little since we're super agreement world. I agree on the yes, make your measures of success appropriate for what you're trying to do. Establish that early. One of the things that I think warrants discussion is, does the velocity matter? And it does if you need to be able to predict what you can deliver for what amount of money by when. And maybe the what isn't quite going to fit in by knowing your velocity, but how much is it going to cost by when, once somebody has rough-sized or T-shirt-sized what you're going to build?
I cannot disagree with that because my product actually does that, right? Like in a very lightweight form. So it's like, nah, velocity's stupid, right? And then it's like being recorded. It's like, what did he say? But I think it's true as long as it's consistent, because you have like really wild fluctuations and like the velocity becomes meaningless, right? So it's about maintaining kind of a steady velocity, which when you achieve that, like it turns out like all of these other things are like in a healthy place. It's like how you communicate, how you work, how you break things down, right? It's like, wow, we've achieved velocity consistency. We have no volatility. Now we can predict, right? So that's why I kind of shift the emphasis on that. It's still in terms of the same metric though, right?
All right, we had another question back here, I think.
Regardless of what methodology you choose, whether it's waterfall or agile, a lot of the work that we do is focused on getting the right information to the right people so they can make the right decisions at the right time. There's a lot of trust and a lot of transparency required there. In organizations, and I'm looking more at Dan and Jesse here, where you have low overhead of people watching to make sure that we're sifting out the right information, What practices have you put in place to make sure we're identifying the right information and it's getting to the right people, and that we're not pointing at each other saying that was your job to catch that, not mine, and so we can actually move efficiently?
Oh, thank you. I think so. With my particular situation and stuff right now, there's a lot of change and stuff that's happening. We have heavy deadlines and stuff that we're trying to. So people are very nervous. What's going on? How's this going? So part of it, I'm very anal about the tool and stuff that we use. I make sure it's up to date. It's very clear, and making sure that somebody doesn't have to come bother me. They can go into the tool and they're like, okay, cool. We know exactly where things are. If they have questions, if something's blocked, we put it blocked and we say why it's blocked. If there's a dependency, even if it's a dependency on a story that can't stop, we'll block that. Because even though you can put a dependency level, sometimes people don't go that deep. And so we keep it really very, very simple. I've even, trying to do, this is a good example. We recently had to do a pivot on requirements that we realized we weren't really quite there, and we were starting to go down the wrong path. So we're like, okay, breaks, and then bringing all the key stakeholders. Because I first started having small conversations, and I realized you talk to one person, and somebody, I want to know about what's going on with this. I'm like, okay, I'm going to set a meeting. We bring everybody together, and it was so efficient, because then it's like, okay, 10 minutes for you. Tell me what your issue is. What's your wish list? And go to the next person, and they all get to hear what they were needing, and we actually were able to come to a really nice compromise of what the requirement needed to be to move us forward. And now it's like within 24 hours, we have new wireframes, new comps, and we might actually get things back on track instead of having, to have this vicious cycle. And so I think, it's those kind of reaching out to people, make sure the requirements are right, and if things just seem off, just bring people together. But it's just the tool and just visibility. I over communicate. When I have something that's going to go live, wow, is this going to hit? Oh, I got to talk to Carlos with configuration. I got to talk to service delivery. I got to make sure we do a product notice, and just having my own little checklist. But I don't know. I communicate early, often, and as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a multifaceted, I think, question, right? And I think it depends on what situation and what kind of information you're talking about. I mean, we struggle in our team with people feeling connected to what we're working on, and why we're working on what we're working on, right? And how do we make that decision, and who do we talk to? So it's kind of like having confidence that the person making the decision made it for the right reasons, right? And so then it's kind of typically it's like the PM is sort of in the middle of this, right? It's like, well, PM just comes and says, well, we're going to do this. It's like, okay, well, I guess you're the PM, you decided, so I guess I'll do it, right? But then there's this discontent around, well, are we really, is it the right thing to be working on, right? Why are we doing this? And it's kind of maybe the same question that somebody higher up, like a stakeholder, might have, why are they working on this, right? Yeah, they're empowered, right? They could make that call, they wrote that story, but and that sort of, I don't know, uncertainty or, I don't know, lack of confidence maybe builds up over time, and then you start kind of questioning, and there's accusations, and it gets kind of tense. So I think it's always important for the PM to always remember, people don't know how you got here, right? Share the story, share the rationale. Here's who I talked to, here's the data that we used, right? So have a deck that basically kind of reinforces a decision, share that, overshare that, right? Share it with the stakeholders, share it with your team, right? And just kind of keep people exposed, more or less the same information, synthesized ideally, right? So that they understand and they can and they support you, and the support comes from both above and also from within the team. But it's kind of like a heavy thing. You have to keep doing this all the time, and it's easy to forget. It's I'm busy. We're just I know I already talked to these people, and we're just going to do this, and then it just kind of builds up again. You're like, oh man, we need to step back, socialize, right? Get some buy-in. Just lightweight. It could be lightweight. I found that people using really unstyled decks actually have a better it somehow gets across better, right? Rather than this is a polished. Everything's beautiful. I have beautiful presentations and builds and animations and everything. And then people are you're hiding something, right? Just make it real. This is real. I didn't spend too much time on it, but it conveys the right information. Anyway, I think this topic can kind of just go on and expand in scope. So hopefully we're sort of answering?
Yeah, did that answer your question, or do you? Okay. Okay.
He's like, stop talking now.
All right, let me go back here.
I'd like to hear the panel's thoughts on how do you overcome the roadblocks, excuse me, how do you overcome the roadblocks of intersecting product and project management? What are your thoughts on how can we do it? Is it roadmap planning? I'm just curious, how can we get there? What do you guys think?
I'll take a stab at it. So, kind of building off of what Dan said earlier, really it's about trust, honestly. We kind of spoke about it a little bit earlier with my dev team analogy, right? But honestly, having the PM and the product team working side by side, the PM having a full understanding of why the PO wants to build this thing, and the PO having an understanding of the financial constraints or the time constraints or the domain constraints that they're up against as well. That doesn't just come from a PowerPoint deck, right? That doesn't come from an email that you send every 2 weeks. It comes from a standing meeting, maybe 10 minutes every day or every other day. What are you working on? How can I help you? Right? Building those relationships. That's the only way that I see that kind of thing getting resolved. Right? You guys are working together, rowing the boat in the same direction with slightly different perspectives, but really they're very similar roles. So you need to have a very good relationship.
Rick or Pam? Yeah.
Well, and for us, I definitely think it's more complex, right? So we have different product managers with competing priorities, right? And so it's really about finding a structure where we can get them all together in and build out the roadmaps, right, that sort of coordinate and still get the ultimate business goals, because it's tough. I mean, I'll be honest, we really struggle. The thing we struggle with most is trying to get the different units to deliver in sequence that really delivers business value, because they all have their own little silos, and as much as we like to say we're trying to break those down, that's where we struggle. And so having that consistency and bringing the product managers together and sort of horse trading to get what they want so that we get a cohesive product. That's how we've been successful, or trying to be successful.
that horse trading only works when you respect the other guy you're dealing with. Right?
Absolutely.
If it's just what can you give me and screw you, man, like that's never going to work.
And that's where we started. And as we've sort of been on this journey, the teams have found out that at some point in time, they need another team, and so you have to have those good coordination skills, and that goes back to that EQ comment, right? You've got to build those relationships and find a way to make it work for the organizations.
+1.
All right, I think we might have some time for one more question, if anybody's got any final questions, unless we're good there. Okay. What's that? All right. Well, what I'd like to do then is maybe have each of you just kind of share what you would kind of, I guess, want to leave the audience with as sort of your takeaway from the conversations tonight. So again, just the kind of advice, whether it's something you heard and learned from something, whatever it is, just something that you think would be great to take away. And we'll just, does anybody want to start? And then we'll just rotate through the group.
It'll be brief. So it's been said a million times, but it's people over process, right? I mean, I come from a strictly agile background, and if you're relying heavily on process and you're undervaluing the relationships that you're going to build, and that's really how things get done, and that's where people want to work. They don't want to come to work and have to negotiate a labyrinth of bureaucracy. They want to work with their buddy and get things done. And believe it or not, that's, from my perspective, the superior, faster, quicker, least expensive way to do it.
Excellent.
Maybe I'm just selfish, but I want more product managers out there. And I think we should blur the lines or get rid of the distinctions between project and product. And it's more like we just need people who can come in and help products get built, get out the door, help us learn, right? The industry is growing. I swear, like every company in the world is looking for, people that can do that. They could, have sort of multiple complementary skills. And so the more we can do to kind of invest in our education and, sort of evolution as people in these roles, I think the better for all of us.
I'd probably say my closing comments would be to folks who are looking to make the transition. You will eventually come to a crossroads where you can choose the path of working with a team day to day, being in the weeds, or you will choose the path of being more strategic and having to think of tomorrow and not to be, that those are definitely going to come. That's where I had found, and I decided I wanted to go more towards the strategic. And as much as I love working with the team day to day, but it was also the thing I was the most afraid of, because then I knew I'd have the most growth from it. So definitely don't be afraid to take that path.
I'm going to throw out a little something different. My takeaway is that when I'm at work and I'm frustrated and wondering, why aren't we making this transition faster? Why aren't we being more successful? We're not the only ones that aren't just, textbook fast and everything's perfect. So take a breath, know that they're good frameworks, whether it's agile or waterfall, to your point, think about the people, and then your efficiency will come, even though it's not as fast as you might want it to.
And I had thought about a little different spin on this. So I think for us, and part of this is based on the industry that I'm in, right? We're trying to take our product managers and get them closer to the customer. And that's a big deal for us because we focused on thousands of initiatives that really didn't help us sell better products, help our providers better, help our customers, lower the cost, right? And so we're trying to take a focus on, instead of just doing process for process sakes, helping our customers, our clients, our providers, that kind of stuff. And if you're a product manager, I'd recommend that you get closer to the customers. And
Excellent. All right. Anything else anybody wants to throw out there? All right. Well, I would like to thank the panel. And maybe if everybody would mind, we'll give them a round of applause.